The chapel doors groaned shut behind her, sealing Lillian's fate. Every step toward the altar felt like walking through water, her silk gown a shroud rather than a celebration. Lord Ashford waited with a smile that never reached his cold eyes, while whispers of his cruelties echoed through the pews. But it was the other man, the Duke, standing in the shadows, jaw clenched, hands fisted, who made her heart fracture. Because Gabriel Thornwood had loved her once, before duty and honor demanded he step aside. And now, as her trembling hand reached for Ashford's, the Duke's eyes blazed with something that looked terrifyingly like rebellion. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Lady Lillian Fairmont had been raised to understand her place in the intricate tapestry of English society. At 21, she possessed the kind of beauty that artists attempted to capture. Golden hair that caught the light like spun honey, eyes the color of summer sky, and a grace that came from years of careful instruction. But beneath her porcelain exterior beat the heart of someone who had always harbored secret dreams of choosing her own path. The Fairmont estate in Hampshire sprawled across 300 acres of manicured lawns and ancient oak forests. The manor itself was a testament to generations of wealth and influence, its Georgian facade impressive against the rolling countryside. Lillian had grown up within these walls, learning the delicate art of being ornamental, of speaking without saying anything of substance, of existing primarily as a reflection of her family's status. Her father, the Earl of Fairmont, had made his intentions clear from the time she turned 18. You will marry well, Lillian. Not for love. That is a luxury our position cannot afford. You will marry for alliance, for power, for the continuation of our family's standing. His words had been delivered over breakfast, as casual as a comment about the weather, while her mother nodded approvingly from behind her teacup. Lord Edmund Ashford had been the Earl's choice for 3 years now. The Ashford family possessed one of the oldest titles in England, their lineage traceable to the Norman conquest. Their estates in Yorkshire were vast, their political connections unassailable. On paper, Lord Ashford was an impeccable match. Handsome in a sharp-featured way, educated at Eton and Cambridge, a member of all the right clubs. But Lillian had seen beneath the veneer. Their courtship, if it could be called that, had been a carefully orchestrated series of chaperoned meetings and formal dinners. Lord Ashford was 35, 14 years her senior, and he regarded her with the same calculating appraisal one might give a prized mare. His compliments were never about her thoughts or her interests, but always about her appearance, her breeding, her suitability as a vessel for his heirs. You have excellent bone structure, he had told her once, tilting her chin up with cold fingers. You'll produce strong children. That's what matters. She had learned to recognize the warning signs, the way his grip would tighten on her arm when she expressed an opinion he found inappropriate. The flash of anger in his pale grey eyes when she laughed too freely at a gathering. The subtle threats disguised as concern. A wife of mine will know her place. I will not tolerate the kind of independent thinking that plagues modern women. Her younger brother Thomas had tried to warn their father. He's cruel, father. Everyone knows about his temper. The servants at his estate speak of it in whispers. His last intended broke off the engagement rather than marry him. The Earl had dismissed such concerns with a wave of his hand. Gossip and speculation. A man of Ashford's position must be firm. Lillian will learn to manage him, as women have managed their husbands for centuries. But it was the incident with the stable boy that had truly revealed Ashford's nature. During a visit to the Fairmont estate, Lillian had witnessed him strike a young groom for allegedly not grooming his horse properly. The violence had been swift and brutal, delivered with a smile that suggested he enjoyed the act. When Lillian had gasped in horror, Ashford had turned to her with that same cold smile. Discipline, my dear, something every household requires. You'll understand when you're mistress of Ashford Hall. She had nightmares about becoming mistress of Ashford Hall. Despite her growing dread, the wedding preparations marched forward with the inexorability of a military campaign. Her mother oversaw every detail with obsessive precision. The guest list of 300 included half the peerage. The dress was being created by London's most fashionable modiste. The chapel at Ashford Hall was being decorated with thousands of white roses. "You should be grateful," her mother often said. "Do you know how many mothers would kill for such an advantageous match for their daughters? You will be Lady Ashford. Your children will have impeccable lineage. This is everything a woman of your station should desire." But Lillian desired something else entirely, though she barely dared admit it even to herself. She desired freedom. She desired the ability to read books that interested her rather than the approved novels deemed suitable for ladies. She desired conversations about philosophy and politics rather than embroidery and gossip. She desired to travel beyond the carefully controlled boundaries of country estates and London seasons. And somewhere, in the most secret chamber of her heart, she desired Gabriel Thornwood, the Duke of Greystone. Gabriel was everything Lord Ashford was not. At 28, he had inherited his title young and had used his position to champion progressive causes in Parliament. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he wore slightly longer than fashion dictated and eyes the colour of storm clouds. More importantly, he possessed a mind that Lillian found endlessly fascinating. They had met 3 years ago at a house party in Derbyshire. While others were engaged in the usual frivolous pursuits, Gabriel had been in the library, and Lillian had discovered him there quite by accident. They had spent 3 hours discussing everything from agricultural reform to the poetry of Lord Byron, and for the first time in her life, Lillian had felt truly seen. Their friendship had grown through subsequent encounters during the London season. Gabriel sought her out at balls, manoeuvred to sit beside her at dinners, and found excuses to call at the Fairmont townhouse. He never said anything improper. He was too honourable for that. But Lillian had seen the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, and she had looked back with equal longing. But Gabriel's honour was also his curse. When her father announced her engagement to Lord Ashford, Gabriel had called upon the Earl to express his own intentions. The conversation had been brief and brutal. The Earl made it clear that a duke's title, while impressive, could not compete with the political alliance the Ashford match would bring. Gabriel's progressive politics made him controversial, potentially dangerous to the Fairmont family's more conservative interests. "I must respect your father's decision," Gabriel had told Lillian during their last private conversation, his voice raw with suppressed emotion. "To pursue you against his wishes would ruin you socially. I cannot do that to you no matter what I feel." "And what do you feel?" she had whispered, desperate to hear him say the words. But Gabriel was too noble. He had simply taken her hand, pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles that burned through the fabric, and walked away. That had been 6 months ago. The wedding was now 3 weeks away, scheduled for the end of June, when Yorkshire would be at its most beautiful. The formal invitations had been sent, including one to the Duke of Greystone, because to exclude him would cause talk. Lillian spent her days in a haze of fittings and final preparations, smiling when expected, agreeing to every decision made on her behalf. At night, she would stand at her window overlooking the gardens and wonder if there was any way to escape the fate that had been chosen for her. The only person who seemed to understand her misery was her father's sister, Aunt Agatha. Lady Agatha Pemberton was a widow who had scandalized society by refusing to remarry after her husband's death 15 years ago. Instead, she had moved to London, established a salon frequented by artists and intellectuals, and lived precisely as she pleased. "You don't have to go through with this," Agatha had told her during a rare private moment. "There are always choices, even when it seems there are none." But what choice did she have? To defy her father would mean complete social ruin, not just for herself, but potentially for Thomas as well. She would be cut off, penniless, unmarriageable. And for what? A duke who, despite his feelings, had chosen duty over his heart? As the wedding day approached, Lillian felt as though she were drowning in silk and lace, suffocating under the weight of expectations she could never escape. The morning of the wedding dawned, with the kind of perfect English summer weather that seemed to mock Lillian's inner turmoil. Ashford Hall blazed white against a cloudless sky, its extensive gardens transformed into a fairy tale setting, with thousands of roses cascading from every surface. 300 guests, representing the cream of English society, had descended upon Yorkshire for the event of the season. Lillian sat before the mirror in the bride's chambers, while her mother and a trio of ladies' maids arranged her appearance with meticulous precision. The wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace, the veil secured with the Fairmont diamond tiara. She looked, she thought distantly, like a beautiful corpse prepared for viewing. "Perfect," her mother declared, stepping back with satisfaction. "You are a vision. Lord Ashford will be well pleased." The words made Lillian's stomach churn. She had barely eaten in 3 days, surviving on tea and the slim hope that something, anything, might prevent this marriage from taking place. But miracles, she had learned, were in short supply. The chapel at Ashford Hall was a Gothic masterpiece, all soaring arches and stained glass that cast jeweled light across the assembled guests. As Lillian made her way down the aisle on her father's arm, she could see them all watching, the curious, the envious, the ones who had come merely for the spectacle. The air was thick with the scent of roses and expensive perfume. And there, standing in one of the front pews on the groom's side, was Gabriel. Their eyes met for one searing moment, and Lillian saw everything he had never said written across his face: anguish, regret, and something fierce that made her stumble slightly. Her father's grip tightened, pulling her forward. Lord Ashford waited at the altar, impeccably dressed in mourning clothes, his pale eyes assessing her with cold satisfaction. He looked like a man who had just secured an excellent business acquisition. As she took her place beside him, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You will be the perfect obedient wife, Lillian, or you will learn what disobedience costs." The Archbishop of York himself was performing the ceremony, testament to the importance of the union. His voice rang out in the traditional words, each one feeling like a nail in Lillian's coffin. She responded mechanically when prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. They had just reached the critical moment. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. When the chapel doors burst open with a tremendous crash, a woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, her appearance disheveled, her face pale but determined. Lillian recognized her with a shock. It was Miss Charlotte Winters, a beautiful young woman from a respectable but not wealthy family who had been present at several social events over the past season. "I object!" Charlotte's voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. "This marriage cannot proceed because Lord Ashford is already married. To me!" The chapel erupted in chaos. Guests surged to their feet, exclaiming in shock and confusion. The Archbishop looked appalled. Lillian felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Lord Ashford's face transformed from smug satisfaction to murderous rage in an instant. "You lying—" "Am I lying?" Charlotte interrupted, walking down the aisle with remarkable composure given the circumstances. She held up papers. "Here is the certificate from our marriage 6 months ago in Scotland. You promised me everything, Edmund. You said we would announce it after you had secured your political alliance with the Fairmont family. You said I would be your mistress in secret until the opportune moment." "She's mad," Ashford snarled, but something in his expression betrayed him. Charlotte had reached the altar now, and she turned to address the assembled guests. "He seduced me with promises of marriage. When I insisted on a legal ceremony, he took me to Gretna Green. I have witnesses. I have the certificate. And I have his letters promising me everything." Her voice broke slightly. "I believed him. I was a fool." Lillian's father had gone purple with rage. "Ashford, what is the meaning of this?" "The woman is clearly unhinged," Ashford began, but Charlotte cut him off by thrusting the papers directly at the Archbishop. Examine them yourself, Your Grace. The marriage is legal and binding. The Archbishop took the documents with trembling hands, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read. The silence in the chapel was absolute, every guest straining to hear what would come next. "These appear authentic," the Archbishop said finally, his voice heavy with disapproval. "If this marriage exists, Lord Ashford, this ceremony cannot proceed. You would be committing bigamy." "That certificate is a forgery," Ashford shouted, his composure completely shattered. "This is a conspiracy to ruin me." But the damage was done. The whispers had started, a rising tide of scandal that would drown them all. Lillian stood frozen at the altar, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Part of her recognized that she had been saved from a terrible fate, but another part understood that she was now at the center of the most spectacular scandal in recent memory. Her mother had begun to weep loudly. Thomas had appeared at Lillian's side, trying to lead her away from the altar. And through it all, Lillian's eyes found Gabriel's once more. He was watching with an expression she couldn't decipher. Shock, yes, but also something that looked almost like hope. "This ceremony is concluded," the Archbishop declared. "Until this matter is resolved legally, no marriage can take place. Lord Ashford, you will need to address these allegations immediately." Ashford's mask had completely crumbled. He looked between Charlotte, who stood with quiet dignity despite her bombshell announcement, and Lillian, who he clearly regarded as a possession being stolen from him. When he spoke, his voice dripped with venom. "You think this saves you?" he said directly to Lillian. "Your reputation is destroyed regardless. No one will have you now. The bride abandoned at the altar. You'll rot as a spinster, a laughingstock." "Better a laughingstock than your wife," Lillian heard herself say, surprising everyone, including herself. The words unleashed something in Ashford. He lunged toward her, his face contorted with rage. But Gabriel was suddenly there, stepping between them with a force that sent Ashford stumbling backward. "You will not touch her," Gabriel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "In fact, you will leave this chapel immediately, before I forget that we are in a house of God." For a moment, it seemed Ashford might actually attack a duke in front of 300 witnesses. But even in his fury, some sense of self-preservation remained. He spat at Gabriel's feet, cast one last malevolent look at Lillian, and stormed from the chapel with Charlotte hurrying after him, still clutching her documents. The remaining guests dissolved into frenzied conversation, the scandal already being dissected and embellished. Lillian's parents were surrounded by concerned aristocrats, offering condolences and fishing for additional details. The perfect wedding had become a disaster that would be discussed in drawing rooms for years. Lillian felt strong hands on her shoulders, Gabriel steadying her as her legs finally gave way. "I've got you," he murmured. "Let me get you out of here." She nodded numbly, allowing him to guide her through a side door, away from the chaos and the staring eyes. They emerged into a small antechamber, and only then did Lillian begin to shake uncontrollably. "I can't believe—" she started but couldn't finish. "Breathe," Gabriel instructed gently. "Just breathe, Lillian." She did, drawing in great gasping breaths, the corset suddenly feeling impossibly tight. Gabriel helped her to a chair, kneeling beside her with a concern that was almost painful to witness. "Did you know," she finally managed to ask, "about Charlotte?" "I suspected Ashford was not what he seemed. I hired an investigator weeks ago." He looked almost guilty. "I couldn't let you marry him without being certain of his character, but I never imagined this." "So it was you," Lillian whispered, understanding dawning. "You sent her." "I merely provided her with the means to make her case heard. The decision to come forward was entirely hers. She has as much claim to justice as you do to freedom." Freedom. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terror in equal measure. Because yes, she was free of Ashford, but at what cost? Her reputation was in tatters. She had been publicly humiliated. No respectable man would offer for her now. "Your family will want to leave quickly," Gabriel said, rising. "The scandal will be enormous. But Lillian—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "This doesn't have to destroy you. With time and the right strategy—" "Strategy?" She laughed, the sound edging toward hysteria. "Gabriel, I'm ruined, completely and utterly ruined." "No," he said firmly. "You are free. There is a difference." Before she could respond, Thomas burst into the antechamber. "Lillian, mother and father are demanding we leave immediately. The carriage is being prepared." He stopped, taking in Gabriel's presence and his sister's distressed state. "Your Grace, thank you for your assistance." Gabriel nodded, stepping back professionally, though his eyes never left Lillian's face. "Of course. Lady Lillian, if there is anything you need, you have only to send word." Then he was gone, and Lillian was being swept up in the chaos of a hasty departure, her beautiful wedding gown trailing in the dust as her family fled the scene of her spectacular humiliation. The journey back to Hampshire was conducted in suffocating silence. Lillian's mother wept intermittently into her handkerchief, while her father sat rigid with barely suppressed fury. Thomas, seated beside Lillian, occasionally squeezed her hand in wordless support. The wedding gown had been hastily removed and replaced with a simple traveling dress, but Lillian could still feel the ghost of that ivory silk, the weight of expectations that had been so dramatically shattered. When they arrived at the Fairmont estate, the Earl finally spoke. "You will remain here, out of sight, until this scandal dies down. If it ever does." His voice was cold, and Lillian understood that in his eyes she had somehow failed him, despite being the victim of Ashford's deception. The following weeks were a kind of purgatory. London society was ablaze with the scandal, the abandoned bride, the secret wife, the cruel lord exposed. The newspapers had gotten hold of the story, and suddenly Charlotte Winters became a tragic figure, a young woman deceived and ruined by a callous aristocrat. Lord Ashford had fled to the continent to avoid the legal complications, his reputation irreparably damaged. But Lillian, too, was tainted. She received no callers except for the most persistent gossips, who came under the guise of concern but truly wanted first-hand details to embellish. Her mother had taken to her bed with a nervous condition. Her father barely spoke to her. It was Aunt Agatha who arrived 3 weeks after the debacle, sweeping into the Fairmont estate like a force of nature. "This is ridiculous," she declared, finding Lillian in the morning room, where she spent most of her days staring out the window. "You're treating the girl like she committed a crime when she's the wronged party." "The wronged party whose reputation is destroyed," the Earl countered. "She will never marry now. No man of quality will have her." "Good," Agatha said briskly. "Then she's free to make something else of her life. Lillian, pack your things. You're coming to London with me." Lillian looked up in surprise. "London? Aunt Agatha, I can't." "You can, and you will. Hiding in Hampshire will only cement your status as a victim. We're going to show society that you are a woman of substance, not simply a decoration to be bartered between men." The Earl spluttered objections, but Agatha was relentless. She had been a force in society for decades, her independent wealth and status as a widow giving her freedoms most women could never access. After 3 days of argument, she prevailed, and Lillian found herself installed in Agatha's elegant townhouse in Bloomsbury. London in late summer was quieter than during the season, but Agatha's circle operated year-round. Her salon attracted intellectuals, artists, progressive politicians and bluestockings, women who actually cared about ideas rather than fashion. It was a world Lillian had never experienced. "The key," Agatha told her, "is to rewrite your narrative. Let them see you as a woman of intelligence and independence, not merely as Ashford's rejected bride." Under Agatha's guidance, Lillian began to emerge from her shell. She attended lectures at the Royal Society, where new scientific discoveries were discussed. She joined a ladies' literary circle that read philosophy and political theory rather than romantic novels. She even began to write essays about women's education that Agatha promised to submit to progressive journals under a pseudonym. It was at one of Agatha's salons, 6 weeks after the failed wedding, that Lillian encountered Gabriel again. He arrived late to a gathering focused on parliamentary reform, and Lillian's heart stuttered when he entered the drawing room. He looked older somehow, more serious, but his eyes found hers immediately across the crowded space. "Lady Lillian," he said formally when he reached her side, "I'm pleased to see you looking well." "Your Grace," she responded, equally formal despite the electric awareness singing through her veins. "I understood you were at your estate in Derbyshire." "I was. But I've returned for the autumn parliamentary session." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm glad to see you here. Agatha's salon is one of the few places in London where genuine conversation happens." They were interrupted by a gentleman eager to discuss Gabriel's recent speech in Parliament about labour reforms. But throughout the evening, Lillian was intensely aware of his presence. Several times she caught him watching her, and once, when she laughed at something witty said by a poet in attendance, she saw him smile with what looked like pride. As the gathering drew to a close, Gabriel manoeuvred to speak with her again. "You seem different," he observed. "Happier despite everything." "I am different," Lillian agreed. "I've discovered that there's an entire world beyond ballrooms and tea parties. Ideas, purpose, the freedom to think and speak without constantly monitoring whether I'm being appropriately decorative." "You were never merely decorative," Gabriel said quietly. "That was what drew me to you from the beginning, your mind." The words hung between them, laden with everything they couldn't say in a room full of people. Lillian felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, Agatha appeared with a distinguished-looking gentleman in tow. "Lillian, I want you to meet Dr. Gideon Reed. He's a physician and reformer who's been working on improving conditions in London's hospitals. Dr. Reed, my niece, Lady Lillian Fairmont." Dr. Reed was perhaps 35. Tall and lean, with prematurely silver hair and kind grey eyes. He bowed over Lillian's hand with genuine respect, rather than the perfunctory gesture she was accustomed to from society gentlemen. "Lady Agatha speaks highly of your essays, Lady Lillian. I found your piece on women's access to higher education particularly compelling." Lillian blinked in surprise. "You read my essay, but it was published anonymously." "Agatha shares her sources with trusted allies," Dr. Reed said with a gentle smile. "Your arguments were well-reasoned and passionate. Have you considered expanding your ideas into a longer work?" They fell into conversation about education reform and the barriers women faced in pursuing professional careers. Dr. Reed spoke to her as an intellectual equal, asking her opinions and actually listening to her responses. It was intoxicating. Lillian was so absorbed in the discussion that she didn't notice Gabriel's expression darkening as he watched them, nor his rather abrupt departure shortly thereafter. Over the following weeks, Dr. Reed became a regular presence at Agatha's salon. He sought Lillian out specifically, bringing her books he thought she'd enjoy and inviting her to visit the hospital where he worked to see his reforms in action. With Agatha as chaperone, Lillian accepted and found herself fascinated by this world of medicine and service. "You have a natural compassion," Dr. Reed told her, after she had spent an afternoon helping to organize donated supplies for the hospital's charity ward. "And an analytical mind. If you were a man, you'd make an excellent physician." "If I were a man, I'd have many options denied to me now," Lillian responded with some bitterness. "Perhaps. But being a woman gives you different opportunities. You could champion causes that men overlook. You could use your position to advocate for those without voices." It was a seductive vision, a life of purpose rather than mere ornamentation. Dr. Reed never mentioned her scandal, never treated her as damaged goods. He seemed to value her for her thoughts, her potential contributions to society, her fundamental humanity. Agatha watched these developments with satisfaction. "Reed is a good man," she told Lillian one evening. "Unconventional, but in the best possible way. He sees you for who you truly are." But Lillian found her thoughts drifting, confusingly, to Gabriel. He had returned to Derbyshire after that single salon appearance, and she told herself it was for the best. He had made his choice months ago when he stepped aside for her father's wishes, and yet she couldn't forget the way he had looked at her, the fierce protectiveness he'd shown at the chapel, the unspoken words that seemed to shimmer in the air between them. 3 months after the failed wedding, Dr. Reed requested a private meeting with Agatha and Lillian. They met in Agatha's library, and Lillian's heart was already sinking before he began to speak. "Lady Lillian, I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but I've come to admire you greatly these past months, not as a beautiful ornament to be possessed, but as a brilliant mind and compassionate soul. I wonder, that is, I would be honored if you might consider—" He took a breath. "I am not a lord or a duke. I cannot offer you a grand estate or a position in high society. But I can offer you a partnership of equals, a life of meaningful work, and my deepest respect and affection. Would you consider becoming my wife?" The room seemed to contract around Lillian. Dr. Reed was offering exactly what she had claimed to want: intellectual partnership, purpose, freedom from society's restrictive expectations. He was kind, progressive, dedicated to helping others. Any rational woman would leap at such an offer. So why did her first instinct whisper, "But he's not Gabriel"? Lillian requested time to consider Dr. Reed's proposal, and he graciously agreed, understanding that after her ordeal with Ashford, she needed to be certain of any future commitment. But the question hung over her like a sword, demanding an answer her heart wasn't ready to give. It was Agatha who finally confronted her 2 weeks later. "You've been moping about, like Ophelia headed for the river. What's troubling you? Reed is everything you claim to want." "I know," Lillian said miserably. "He's wonderful. He treats me as an equal. He offers me purpose and respect. And yet you hesitate. Why?" Lillian couldn't meet her aunt's knowing eyes. "It wouldn't be fair to him. To marry him when my feelings are confused." Confused about Dr. Reed or confused about a certain duke? The directness of the question made Lillian flinch. Gabriel made his choice months ago. He chose duty over whatever he felt for me. Did he? Or did he make what he thought was the only honorable choice, given your father's intransigence? And now you're free of your father's control, but you're so busy punishing Gabriel for being honorable that you might marry the wrong man out of spite. "That's not—" Lillian started, then stopped. Was that what she was doing? "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted finally. "I was so certain I wanted independence, a life of the mind. And now I have the opportunity, and all I can think about is that you're in love with Gabriel Thornwood, and have been for 3 years. Agatha finished calmly. "My dear girl, there's no shame in that. But you need to be honest with yourself before you make a decision that will affect the rest of your life." The conversation left Lillian more confused than ever. She spent the next week in a fog of indecision until Agatha made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm hosting a gala next week," Agatha declared over breakfast. "A celebration of the season's end and a showcase for some of the reforms we've been championing. I've invited everyone who matters, politicians, artists, philanthropists, including," she added with calculated casualness, "the Duke of Greystone, who's returning to London for the parliamentary session." Lillian's heart performed a complicated maneuver in her chest. "You invited Gabriel?" "I did. And you're going to attend, wearing your finest gown, with your head held high. It's time society saw you as you truly are, brilliant, poised, and utterly unashamed." The week passed in a blur of preparations. Agatha commissioned a gown for Lillian from London's most fashionable modiste, a creation in deep sapphire silk that brought out her eyes and was far more sophisticated than anything she'd worn during her debutante days. The neckline was daring without being scandalous, the cut emphasizing her figure while maintaining elegance. When Lillian descended the stairs the night of the gala, Agatha nodded with satisfaction. Now that is a woman in control of her own destiny. Go forth and conquer. The gala was held at Agatha's townhouse, which had been transformed into a glittering showcase. Over 200 guests filled the rooms, a mixture of aristocracy and intelligentsia that only Agatha could successfully blend. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over animated conversations, while musicians provided elegant background music. Lillian entered the main reception room with her head high, just as Agatha had instructed. She could feel eyes turning toward her, hear the whispers starting. But rather than shrinking from the attention, she met it directly. She was no longer the scandalized bride. She was Lady Lillian Fairmont, essayist and reformer, and she would not be diminished. "Doctor," Reed found her almost immediately, his face lighting with admiration. "You look magnificent," he said warmly, "like Athena descended from Olympus." "Athena was the goddess of wisdom and war," Lillian responded with a slight smile. "I'm not sure which aspect you're referencing." "Both, I think. You've certainly been waging war against society's expectations." Lo! They were soon joined by several of Agatha's circle, and Lillian found herself engaged in a passionate discussion about women's property rights. She was explaining the legal limitations married women faced when she felt a change in the atmosphere, a charged electricity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Gabriel had arrived. He stood in the doorway, taller and more commanding than anyone else in the room, his dark evening clothes impeccably tailored. His eyes scanned the crowd and found her immediately, and even across the distance, Lillian felt the impact of his gaze, like a physical touch. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone accustomed to such gatherings, greeting Agatha and accepting congratulations on his recent parliamentary victories. But his trajectory was clear. He was making his way toward Lillian. Dr. Reed had noticed as well. "The Duke of Greystone," he murmured. "Your aunt mentioned he was your champion during that unfortunate business with Ashford. He was kind when kindness was rare," Lillian managed, her throat suddenly dry. Then Gabriel was before them, bowing with practiced grace. "Lady Lillian, Dr. Reed, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Your Grace," Dr. Reed said pleasantly. "We were discussing the Married Women's Property Act. Do you have thoughts on the matter?" "I do," Gabriel said, his eyes never leaving Lillian's face. "I believe women are perfectly capable of managing their own affairs, financial and otherwise. The idea that they need male guardianship is both patronizing and unjust." "A progressive stance," Dr. Reed observed, "not one shared by many of your fellow peers. I found that being in the majority rarely corresponds with being right." The two men regarded each other with the kind of polite wariness that barely concealed something more primal. Lillian felt as though she were watching two wolves circle each other, each assessing the other as a potential rival. "Dr. Reed has been wonderfully supportive of my writing," Lillian interjected, trying to ease the tension. "He's encouraged me to expand my essays into a longer work on women's education." "Has he?" Gabriel's voice was neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's very generous, though I'm not surprised by your literary accomplishments, Lady Lillian. I've always known you possessed a brilliant mind. You flatter me, Your Grace. I state facts, nothing more." The conversation continued, ostensibly polite but crackling with undercurrents. Dr. Reed spoke of his hospital work and his vision for medical reform. Gabriel discussed his efforts in Parliament to improve factory conditions. Both men were impressive, accomplished, dedicated to improving society, but when Gabriel asked Lillian to dance and Dr. Reed graciously stepped aside, she felt as though she could finally breathe. The waltz was just beginning as Gabriel led her onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist, and even through layers of silk and propriety, Lillian felt branded by his touch. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as they began to move. "But more than that, you look free, happy." "I am," she said, and realized it was true. "These months with Agatha have shown me a different life is possible. I've found purpose, intellectual stimulation, friends who value substance over status. And Dr. Reed, where does he fit into this new life?" The direct question startled her. "He's been very kind. He sees me as more than decorative. Anyone who sees you as merely decorative is a fool, Gabriel interrupted, his grip tightening slightly. You've always been extraordinary, Lillian. Your mind, your compassion, your strength. I've known that since the day we met. Then why did you walk away? The question burst from her before she could stop it. When my father chose Ashford, you stepped aside. You chose your honor over... She couldn't finish. Over my heart. Gabriel's voice was raw. Yes, because I thought it was the only way to protect you. If I had pressed my suit against your father's wishes, you would have been caught in a terrible position. You might have been forced to choose between family and me. I couldn't do that to you. So instead, you let me nearly marry a monster, and I've regretted that decision every moment since. They were barely moving now, just swaying in place, while around them other couples waltzed. Lillian, I've been in agony. When I saw you at that altar, knowing what you were about to commit to, I wanted to tear the chapel apart. I would have, if Charlotte hadn't appeared. And these past months, hearing about you through Agatha, knowing you were building a new life but unable to be part of it. Why couldn't you be part of it? Agatha would have welcomed you. You came to the salon once and then vanished. Because I saw you with Reed, Gabriel admitted. I saw the way he looked at you, the way you laughed with him, and I thought perhaps you'd found what you needed. Perhaps I'd missed my chance entirely. Lillian's breath caught. Gabriel, I love you, he said simply, the words falling between them like stones into still water. I've loved you for 3 years. I stepped aside once because I thought it was right, but I won't make that mistake again. If there's any chance, if you feel anything for me beyond friendship, I'm begging you to tell me now, before you make a choice you can't undo. The music swelled around them, but Lillian heard nothing but the thundering of her own heart. Everything she thought she'd wanted, the partnership with Reed, the life of intellectual purpose, the freedom from romantic complications, suddenly seemed hollow compared to the truth burning in Gabriel's storm-grey eyes. I love you too, he whispered. I've tried not to. I've tried to be sensible and practical and everything a modern woman should be. But I love you, Gabriel. I think I have since that first day in the library in Derbyshire. His hand tightened on hers almost painfully. Then marry me, not because of titles or alliances or what society expects, but because we choose each other, because we're better together than apart. Marry me, Lillian. Dr. Reed, she started, guilt flooding her. We'll understand. He's a good man, but he's not the right man, not for you. Gabriel pulled her slightly closer. Propriety be damned. Say yes, please. Say it. And standing in the middle of Agatha's ballroom, with society watching and her future balanced on a knife's edge, Lillian made the most important decision of her life. Yes, the word was barely audible, but Gabriel heard it. His face transformed, years of restraint and longing finally released. Say it again. Yes, she repeated louder this time. Yes, Gabriel, I'll marry you. Around them the waltz ended, but they stood frozen together, the rest of the world temporarily forgotten. It was Agatha's delighted laugh that finally broke the spell. I assume congratulations are in order, her aunt said, appearing beside them with Dr. Reed in tow. Dr. Reed's face showed understanding rather than anger. He's won your heart then, the Duke. I'm so sorry, Lillian began, but Reed shook his head. Don't be. I hoped I might be the one, but I could see how you looked at him, how you've always looked at him. I wanted a partner, but you deserve a great love. I hope you'll still contribute to the hospital's charity work, though. We need minds like yours. Of course, Lillian said, grateful for his grace. You're a remarkable man, Dr. Reed. You'll find the right partner. Perhaps, but tonight is yours. He bowed and melted back into the crowd, leaving Lillian and Gabriel with Agatha. Well, Agatha said briskly, this is going to cause almost as much talk as the Ashford debacle, the scandalous Lady Lillian and the progressive Duke. Society will be utterly scandalized. Good, Gabriel said, his hand still firmly holding Lillian's. Let them talk. We'll be too busy being happy to care. The announcement of Lady Lillian Fairmont's engagement to the Duke of Greystone hit London society like a bombshell. After the scandal of the failed wedding to Lord Ashford, many had assumed Lillian would fade into obscurity as a spinster. Instead, she had captured one of the most eligible and progressive dukes in England. The newspapers couldn't decide whether to celebrate the romantic triumph or criticize the irregularity of it all. Caricatures appeared, showing Gabriel rescuing Lillian from a dragon labeled cruel lords. Opinion pieces debated whether a woman with Lillian's tainted reputation was suitable for a duke. Progressive journals celebrated it as a love match between equals who shared intellectual interests and reformist goals. Lillian's parents arrived in London 3 days after the announcement, summoned by a tersely worded letter from Agatha. The confrontation in Agatha's drawing room was inevitable and explosive. "A duke!" Lillian's mother exclaimed, torn between triumph at the prestigious match and anger at the irregular way it had come about. "You could have had this months ago if I'd just what, Mother?" Lillian interrupted, her newfound confidence making her bold. "If I'd manipulated Gabriel into declaring himself before Father forced me toward Ashford. That's not how love works." "Love," her father scoffed. "You speak of love as though it's the basis for marriage among people of our class. Marriage is about alliance, about treating women like chess pieces." Gabriel's voice cut through the room as he entered, having heard the argument from the hallway. "With respect, Lord Fairmont, your daughter is not a pawn to be moved about for your political convenience. She's a brilliant, accomplished woman who deserves to make her own choices." "She's my daughter," the Earl said coldly. "And you, Your Grace, are encouraging behavior that borders on rebellious. I'm encouraging her to think for herself. If that's rebellious in your eyes, then perhaps the problem lies with your expectations, not her actions." The argument raged for another hour, but ultimately there was little the Earl could do. Lillian was of age, and Gabriel was a duke with independent means and substantial political influence. The marriage would proceed with or without her parents' blessing. In the end, it was Lillian's mother who broke. "Oh, very well, but it will be a proper wedding this time. No more scandals, a ceremony at St. George's in Hanover Square with all the appropriate pomp." "No," Lillian said firmly. Everyone turned to stare at her. "I won't have another grand spectacle. Gabriel and I will marry quietly, with only family and close friends present, perhaps at his estate chapel in Derbyshire. That's my condition." Her mother looked appalled, but Gabriel's face showed only pride and love. "Derbyshire it is," he agreed, "next month when the autumn colours are at their peak." As her parents departed in a huff, muttering about ungrateful daughters and the decay of proper society, Agatha poured 3 glasses of sherry and raised hers in a toast. "To choosing your own path," she said, "and to a love match that society will be gossiping about for decades." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations, but of a completely different character than the previous wedding arrangements. This time, Lillian made every decision herself. The guest list was limited to 50 people. Gabriel's close family, Lillian's immediate family, Agatha's circle of reformist friends, and a few key political allies. Dr. Reed was invited and graciously accepted, having already begun courting a young widow who worked at his hospital. Charlotte Winters also received an invitation. Her legal case against Ashford had been successful, and she had secured an annulment on grounds of fraud. She arrived at Agatha's townhouse one afternoon, nervous but determined. "I wanted to thank you," Charlotte said to Lillian, "for not hating me. I know my appearance at your wedding was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed," Lillian interrupted. "You saved me from a terrible fate, Charlotte. You had everything to lose and nothing to gain, and you came forward anyway. You're a heroine." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "I'm a fallen woman, ruined and unmarriageable. You're a survivor, and if you'd like, I'd be honored to help you find a new path. Agatha and I have connections to reformist organizations that help women in difficult situations. You could work with them, use your experience to help others. It was the beginning of a friendship that would last decades. Two women who had both been victims of society's cruel expectations and who had both refused to let those expectations define them. The journey to Derbyshire was made in early October, when the countryside blazed with autumn colour. Gabriel's estate, Thornwood Hall, was a graceful Palladian structure set in a valley surrounded by ancient forests. Unlike Ashford's Gothic pile, it felt warm and welcoming, filled with books and art, and evidence of a mind that cared about beauty and ideas. "It's perfect," Lillian breathed, as Gabriel showed her through the portrait gallery and the extensive library that would be hers to use as she pleased. "It's ours," he corrected. "Everything I have is yours, Lillian, but more importantly, you're free here. Free to write, to think, to pursue whatever interests you. I don't want a decorative wife. I want a partner." The night before the wedding, Agatha found Lillian standing at the window of her chamber, looking out over the moonlit grounds. "Nervous?" her aunt asked. "No," Lillian said, surprised to realize it was true. "I feel peaceful, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "You are. And tomorrow, when you walk down that aisle, it will be toward a man who loves you for exactly who you are, not who he wants you to be. That's rarer than you might think." The wedding took place in the estate chapel, a jewel-like medieval structure covered in ivy. Lillian wore a simple gown of ivory silk with autumn flowers woven into her hair. She walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm, passing the smiling faces of the people who truly mattered. And at the altar stood Gabriel, looking at her as though she were the answer to every prayer he'd ever uttered. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed her with a tenderness that promised years of love and partnership ahead. The small gathering erupted in applause, and Lillian felt a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The wedding breakfast was held in Thornwood Hall's great dining room, filled with laughter and genuine celebration. Even Lillian's parents seemed to have softened, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while her father grudgingly admitted that Gabriel seemed a decent enough fellow for a reformer. As the afternoon drew to a close, and guests began departing for nearby inns or the journey back to London, Gabriel found Lillian in the library, where she had escaped for a moment of quiet. "Overwhelmed?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Grateful," she corrected. "For this, for you, for the fact that my life didn't end when I thought it would. If things had gone as planned, I'd be Lady Ashford now, trapped in a miserable existence. Instead, you're Duchess of Greystone, free to be exactly who you are." He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "And I'm the luckiest man in England." "We're both lucky," Lillian said. "We found each other, and we were brave enough to fight for it." As the sun set over Derbyshire, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lillian understood that her life was just beginning. Not the life that had been chosen for her, but the one she had chosen for herself. 18 months after their wedding, Lillian stood in the morning room of Thornwood Hall, reviewing correspondence and plans for the day ahead. Outside, late spring sunshine gilded the gardens, where new growth pushed eagerly toward the light. So much had changed since that October wedding, and yet Lillian felt she was only now fully understanding the magnitude of her transformation. The Duchess of Greystone, it still felt strange to think of herself by that title, had become a figure of considerable influence in reformist circles. Her essays on women's education, now published under her own name, had sparked debates in Parliament and drawing rooms alike. Gabriel's political connections and her own sharp intellect had proven a formidable combination. Together, they had established a school for girls on the Greystone estate, one that taught not only the traditional accomplishments, but mathematics, sciences, and philosophy. Daughters of tenant farmers learned alongside daughters of the gentry, a revolutionary concept that had scandalized conservatives and inspired progressives. Lillian taught literature and composition herself, finding deep satisfaction in nurturing young minds. "The architect's plans for the hospital wing have arrived," Gabriel announced, entering with an armful of rolled documents. Even after 18 months of marriage, Lillian's heart still skipped when she saw him, rumpled from his morning ride, shirt sleeves rolled up, utterly unconcerned with ducal dignity when they were private. Already? That was quick. Lillian moved to help him spread the plans across the large work table they shared. The hospital wing was their latest project, an expansion of the Greystone Estate's medical facilities to serve the surrounding villages, with Dr. Reed serving as consulting physician on the design. "Reed wrote back about your proposal for the women's clinic," Gabriel said, producing a letter from his pocket. "He thinks it's brilliant. He's identified 2 female physicians who would be willing to staff it." Female physicians. Lillian smiled at the phrase. It had seemed impossible just 2 years ago, but the world was changing, slowly but surely, and she and Gabriel were part of that change. They worked together for an hour, discussing plans and reviewing correspondence from various reform organizations. This partnership of equals was everything Lillian had dreamed of and more. Gabriel respected her opinions, sought her counsel on political matters, and supported her work without trying to control or diminish it. A knock interrupted their planning. Their butler announced visitors, Aunt Agatha and Charlotte Winters, who now served as secretary for the Women's Educational Fund that Agatha had established with Lillian's help. "We've had another 12 applications this month," Charlotte reported, looking healthy and confident in a practical traveling suit. "Young women seeking scholarships for teaching college or nursing programs. The fund is making a real difference." Because you've made it accessible," Agatha said to Lillian. "Women from all classes, not just aristocrats, can apply." That was the crucial innovation. They spent the afternoon discussing fund business, planning a fundraising gala for the autumn, and reviewing proposals for new initiatives. Charlotte had blossomed in her role, her experience with Ashford making her particularly sympathetic to women trapped in difficult circumstances. She had become one of Lillian's closest friends, their shared history a bond stronger than conventional society connections. As Agatha and Charlotte departed in the late afternoon, another visitor arrived, Thomas, Lillian's brother, now down from Oxford for the spring break. At 19, he had developed into a thoughtful young man with progressive ideals that constantly exasperated their father. "I wanted your advice," Thomas said over tea, "about my future. Father expects me to take a position in government, something traditionally conservative, but I've been thinking about law, specifically legal advocacy for workers' rights." Lillian and Gabriel exchanged a glance. "That's a noble goal," Gabriel said, "but it will put you at odds with your father." "I know, but you taught me something, both of you." Thomas looked at his sister with profound respect. "You showed me that it's better to live authentically, even if it's difficult, than to spend your life playing a role assigned to you. Lillian, you were supposed to be a decorative society wife. Instead, you're changing the world. If you can do that, surely I can pursue the career I actually want." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. "You can, Thomas, and we'll support you however we can." That evening, after Thomas had retired to his rooms, Lillian and Gabriel walked through the gardens in the golden twilight. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together to decompress from the day's activities and simply enjoy each other's company. "Do you ever regret it?" Gabriel asked suddenly. "The scandal, the social censure, the way some of society still treats you?" Lillian considered the question seriously. It was true that some doors remained closed to her. Certain aristocratic ladies still snubbed her at gatherings, whispering about her abandoned wedding and unconventional marriage. She would never be fully accepted by the most conservative elements of society. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret any of it. The scandal freed me, Gabriel. It showed me that I could survive society's worst judgments, and not just survive, but thrive. Without it, I might have spent my whole life trying to be what others expected. Now, I get to decide who I am." You're extraordinary, Gabriel said, pulling her close. Have I mentioned that today? Only 3 times. You're slipping in your husbandly duties. He laughed, the sound rich and warm. I'll try to do better. Perhaps over dinner I can enumerate all the ways you've exceeded my wildest expectations as a duchess. That could take all night. I'm counting on it. As they walked back toward the house, Lillian caught a glimpse of movement in one of the upper windows, a maid preparing the nursery. Because there was other news, joyful and terrifying in equal measure, Lillian was 3 months pregnant, expecting their first child in the autumn. They hadn't announced it publicly yet, wanting to savor the secret a bit longer. But soon enough, there would be an heir to the Greystone title, a child who would grow up in a household where intelligence was valued over decorative beauty, where questions were encouraged, where their mother was a published author and their father a crusading politician. "What are you thinking about?" Gabriel asked, noticing her distant expression. "Our child, the world we're building for them, how different their life will be from the one I was supposed to have." "Better, you mean? Infinitely better." News reached them a week later about Lord Ashford. He had attempted to return to England after 18 months on the continent, hoping the scandal had faded enough for him to reclaim his position. Instead, he found his estates encumbered with debt, his political allies having abandoned him, and society's doors firmly closed. The newspapers reported that he had taken to drinking heavily and ranting about the injustices done to him. "Do you feel any satisfaction?" Gabriel asked when they read the reports together. "Mostly I feel pity," Lillian admitted. "He could have been different. He had every advantage, title, wealth, position, but he chose cruelty and control over compassion and partnership. Now he's alone with his bitterness while we—" She gestured around their sun-filled library, at the plans for the hospital and school, at the life they'd built together. "We have everything that matters." Charlotte visited again in June, bringing news that made Lillian laugh with delight. Dr. Reed had proposed to the widow he'd been courting, a remarkable woman who had been a nurse and shared his passion for medical reform. The wedding would be in August, and both Lillian and Gabriel were invited. "So many happy endings," Charlotte marveled. "Who would have thought, standing in that chapel 18 months ago, that we'd all end up here?" "You were so brave," Lillian said. "Coming forward the way you did. Have you ever regretted it?" "Every day at first," Charlotte admitted. "The social cost was enormous. But then Agatha took me in. You befriended me, and I discovered I could be more than just someone's ruined conquest. I could actually matter, make a difference. So no, ultimately I don't regret it. Sometimes destruction is necessary for rebuilding." The summer passed in a blur of activity. The school's first term was so successful, they were already planning to expand. The hospital wing construction began on schedule. Lillian's newest essay, on the need for married women's property rights, was published in 3 major journals and sparked fierce debates. And through it all, Lillian's pregnancy progressed, her body changing in ways both wondrous and uncomfortable. Gabriel was attentive to the point of being comically overprotective, insisting she rest more and worry less, even as she continued her work right up until the final weeks. In late October, on an afternoon when autumn colours blazed across Derbyshire exactly as they had for her wedding, Lillian gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Agatha Rose, after the aunt who had saved Lillian and the flowers that had decorated that catastrophic first wedding. "She's perfect," Gabriel whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that made Lillian's heart ache. "She has your eyes." "And your stubborn chin," Lillian observed with a tired smile. "She'll need it. I have a feeling she'll be as determined to change the world as her mother." As Lillian watched her husband hold their daughter, surrounded by the life they had built together against all odds, she understood that this was what true freedom looked like. Not the absence of commitment or responsibility, but the ability to choose them on your own terms. She had been promised to a cruel lord, abandoned at the altar, and scandalized in the eyes of society. But from that destruction, she had built something infinitely more precious, a life of purpose, love, and authentic happiness. She had bloomed exactly where she had planted herself, in the rich soil of choice and partnership. And as little Agatha Rose opened her eyes for the first time, looking up at her parents with Gabriel's storm-grey gaze, Lillian felt certain that the story she and Gabriel had begun was just the first chapter. The world was changing, slowly but inevitably, and their daughter would grow up in a better version of it, one where women could choose their own destinies, where love mattered more than social positioning, where character counted for more than title. Lord Ashford had predicted she would rot as a laughing-stock spinster. Instead, she had become a duchess, a reformer, a published author, a mother, and most importantly, herself. And that, Lillian reflected as she took her daughter into her arms for the first time, was the greatest triumph of all. Not becoming what others demanded, but becoming fully, authentically, courageously herself. The golden cage had been broken, and Lillian had discovered she could fly. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and share it with your friends. Tell me in the comments what your favorite part was. I read every single one. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to life. Thank you for being part of this journey.